We'll get started. Welcome everyone. I'm sure we've got some latecomers that will join us very soon to this webinar on the Nature-Based Tourism Co-Investment Fund. My name's Tom Corns. For those that you don't know me, I'm a Senior Policy Officer here at the LGA, and I primarily coordinate economic development issues and assist councils and advocate for councils in that area. This webinar is an initiative of the Department of Environment and Water, and it was organised in response to the strong council interest in the fund. And I'll just take this opportunity to remind everyone that this webinar will be recorded so that it can be used as a resource for councils and council staff that weren't able to join us today. And it will be available on the LGA's members only part of our website. By way of introduction to the fund, it's committed $5 million to activate or build on existing ecologically sensitive tourism offerings in the state's national parks, reserves, including reservoir reserves, botanic gardens and Crown land. And grant applications can range from $20,000 to $1 million, and applicants are expected to contribute at least half of the total financial cost of their project. And the fund is now open and will remain available until June 2022 or until all funds are exhausted. And of course, councils are eligible to apply. Now today, to talk through some of the fine-grained detail of the fund and the exciting investment opportunities it provides to councils, we're very fortunate and grateful to have Department of Environment and Water staff presenting and answering your questions today. We have Mr. Chris Thomas, the Manager of Tourism and Visitor Services, who will present on the fund and the investment opportunities available to councils. Mr. Tony Halls, the Assistant Manager of Crown Land Operations in the Crown Land branch, who will present on recent changes to the leasing and disposal to councils of Crown land. And we also have Ms. Linda Veers, Project Manager, New Business Opportunities, who will also be on hand to answer any questions and assist me with incoming questions. So we'll start with Chris, and immediately following his presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions. And feel free to raise your hand virtually if you're familiar with that, or type a question out in the chat function. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Chris and I'll get your PowerPoint slide up and running.
Thanks for that. Yeah, appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for everyone for coming along this morning for this session. If I might just acknowledge first the traditional owners of the various lands that we meet on here today. I'm from Port Elliot at the moment. Others might be elsewhere in the state. Just like to pay my respects to the local traditional owners, to their elders past, present and emerging. And obviously some of what we're talking about today will involve Aboriginal land or Aboriginal managed land. So again, pay our respects to those traditional owners. Look, I'd be quite happy for this to be fairly free-flowing. If you've got questions, I'll either take them on notice or during the session. I'm very flexible. Leave that up to you, Tom, however you want to manage that. But perhaps starting with this co-investment fund, just talking about tourism generally, you would have heard the Premier talk many times about tourism being one of our great economic drivers. As an environment department, tourism wasn't necessarily the first thing you think of, but certainly we've got some fantastic assets, natural assets, cultural assets, heritage assets that the Environment Department and the Environment Minister has care and control of. And so we really put our hand up when the Premier started talking about economic growth and tourism as being a driver. We put our hand up as a department and said, look, we want to help. We want to try and drive growth in this sector. And we've got some very bold, ambitious targets. So we talk about doubling our tourism expenditure in heritage and tourism, nature tourism over the next 10 years. So it's a $3.4 billion contribution to the visitor economy. So we can make some massive differences. It's also about creating jobs. So, you know, we'll be really blunt that everything we're trying to do is about living within our means, but also creating jobs for for future generations, and also attracting migration to the state. So once our borders open, of course. So, you know, that's the setting. Is we've got bold targets that we're trying to reach, and some of the tactics that we're using to get there obviously need to be all embracing. So Tom, we can move on to the next slide, please. And this is really where it's sort of, I guess I call this government-led investment. Sometimes if you want to drive growth, you need to make the first step yourself. And so the government really has stepped up over the last couple of years at making a real point of difference that our parks are a major conservation asset and a major community asset, but also a potential economic driver for this state. And so over the last 2 or 3 years, the government has invested almost $130 million in activating our parks. And what you see here is Parks 2025. This is our sort of flagship investment program. So far, $32 million has been put forward to take our national parks and reserves to the next level. Now, obviously, we can't improve all of our national parks and reserves. You know, we have over 360 parks and reserves, plus thousands of pieces of Crown land. This is really about being quite targeted and quite focused, looking at perhaps what are the best examples of South Australia's natural and heritage experiences. You know, what do our community love? What are visitors and tourists from interstate and overseas love about South Australia, and how can we really lift those experiences to be world class? And so you'll see there a list of the sort of experiences the government is investing in, whether it be our Ediacaran fossils, you know, the oldest form of life on the planet. Flinders Ranges, obviously, you know, we're looking to get World Heritage status for the Flinders Ranges, given its significance culturally, but also geologically. Southern Flinders Ranges, you know, the Mount Remarkable region, the Warabra Forest region, that's going to be a super national park in the near future. The beautiful Eyre Peninsula, beautiful beaches, beautiful seas. You know, it's an untapped wonder, the Eyre Peninsula, very popular with the grey nomads, the travellers, backpackers, as is Innes National Park. And Innes National Park has recently just been co-named as a result of the co-management agreement we have made with the local Narunga people down on the Eyre Peninsula. So again, culture weaves all the way through what we're doing in nature, and it's what a lot of people come to South Australia to experience. Mount Lofty and Cleland Wildlife Park, obviously a jewel in the crown in Adelaide. It's probably one of Adelaide's crowning features is, you know, you can be having a coffee in Adelaide CBD and 20 minutes later you can be up with having a koala experience at Cleland Wildlife Park. So that proximity to nature is so important for Adelaide and such a selling point. The beautiful Fleurieu Peninsula and over to Kangaroo Island. Again, you know, jewels in the crown. Kangaroo Island obviously suffered majorly with the summer bushfires this year, but things are already starting to recover on Kangaroo Island, and I think give it a few more years and Kangaroo Island will be back to its former glory. And as we've heard just recently, reservoirs, obviously SA Water has a suite of reservoirs, haven't previously been open to the public, but this government's got an activation program for reservoirs, and we're slowly opening up those reservoirs and encouraging the community to come back in. Next slide, please. So that's the sort of setting. This government-led investment is really about trying to lift the parks offering, and as part of that $32 million Parks 2021 investment, there's this $5 million nature-based tourism co-investment fund. So it was launched back in May this year. It's open for 2 years, so until June 2022. And it's really about trying to activate nature by partnering with the private sector. And maybe the next slide will just help us talk through some of the detail. That's all right. So yes, as was mentioned before, it's $5 million is available at the moment. It's a pilot grant scheme, which means we've got $5 million initially, but the government has committed potentially another $5 million if we manage to spend the first $5 million. So this is the start of a co-investment fund. It's a fairly generous fund in that we're looking for larger grants, so 20,000 up to $1 million. So the basis of this is this fund is a little bit different. We're looking for a smaller number of larger applications. rather than a suite of small applications. So we're really trying to partner with proponents who have got something significant to offer to match that government-led investment I talked about. So we're trying to avoid the sort of Vegemite approach where we spread a thin layer of investment across the state. This is really about saying, where can we make some significant investments that are really going to transform the tourism offering we have in South Australia. That 50% co-contribution, so it's a fairly generous co-contribution, up to 50% we'll fund. The other 50% can come from various other sources, whether it be private equity, whether it be Commonwealth funding, it could even be other state government funding or council funding. We've actually kept it fairly wide ranging as what that co-contribution can be. It just obviously needs to be at 50% from the proponent. And we're looking to really create new or improved experiences or infrastructure. So this is not just an infrastructure fund. It's not just about building stuff. It could also be for enhancing an existing experience. It could be for improving the interpretation or the education components of an existing experience. It could be creating a new product. We've talked about it being public or Aboriginal owned land. So with most grant schemes, they often apply to private land. This is very different. This is the only fund that we're rolling out at the moment that doesn't allow any contribution on private land. So this is very much about activating government land and government assets in partnership with government. So again, that's, Crown land is probably going to be a fairly attractive piece of land for investment in this fund. And as I mentioned, it's open to a range of different enterprises, including Aboriginal corporations, but particularly for councils, local government. Very keen to partner either directly with local government or local government being part of a consortium with some private businesses or local business operators. It could be a cluster that come to us looking to co-invest in some of these initiatives. Next slide, thanks. And so here's just some examples of the things that we're obviously looking to deliver out of this fund. Would really like to see us leveraging off some of that government investment. So, whilst the fund can be used for a variety of tourism experiences or infrastructure, if a private enterprise wants to complement what the government is doing, whether it be the Flinders Ranges or the Fleurieu Peninsula or Kangaroo Islands, adding extra depth to those experiences, I think is really where the focus will be. And of course, it's about connecting in with our nature, connecting in with our heritage, connecting in with our culture, but it's also about triggering visitation. So, ultimately, if we're going to spend money investing in partnerships, we want that to translate to economic benefit and also jobs. So this is very much a stimulus program. It's about trying to grow South Australia's offering in the tourism and visitor services space, and potentially even helping us with managing some of our assets. So we have a large suite of heritage assets, buildings that could be repurposed, used for tourism if there was some of this investment put into them. So this could actually be part of an adaptive reuse strategy to turn, heritage buildings that are needing constant work for conservation and turn them into an economic opportunity where they're self-fulfilling. Next slide, thanks. So yeah, we've tried to keep the range of public lands on offer open. So it's not just the national parks that obviously we have direct care and control of. It's also the Crown lands, and Tony will talk a bit more about Crown lands, but also heritage places that are under the care and control of our minister. We also got a suite of shipwrecks. There's more and more as well. We're partnering with Aboriginal traditional owners in co-managing Aboriginal lands. So Aboriginal owned and controlled lands are in scope. Plus we've partnered with Forestry SA and SA Water. So again, the government sees beyond just, or the ministers beyond its current portfolio, it's where is other public land that shares a similar values to what we do, that people like to recreate in. People love going camping in forests. They would love to get into the reservoirs and recreate. So we've got forests and reservoirs included in this fund, and we work closely with Forestry SA and SA Water to help potential proponents navigate the approvals process. So, if those reservoirs particularly have been very popular since we've started opening those the last couple of years. Next slide, thanks. So really, when you boil it down, what we're trying to deliver is this sort of triple bottom line outcome. As with most grant schemes, we've got some KPIs. We need to make sure that we're delivering positively for the environment. So conservation first. We're an environment department. Conservation is really important to our stakeholders. A lot of people are watching closely to make sure that we don't compromise conservation values in trying to stimulate tourism. So that becomes a really important pillar, that we have to have this conservation front and centre, but also community. We've seen with the COVID pandemic that the response from the community when restrictions lifted back in July, and the amount of people who actually went out into parks and reserves and open spaces to recreate, and just for their health and well-being, just to be able to get out and enjoy nature, we've seen a massive uplift in visitation to parks. So that community sentiment has to be front and centre as well. We mustn't forget our local community when we're thinking about developing experiences and infrastructure for visitors and tourists. The local community has to live locally with those parks, so we need to harmoniously think of conservation and community, and then of course the economy. We have to make sure that we are going to come out of the other side of this pandemic a stronger and bigger and better economy, creating more jobs for South Australians. And so this investment's very much about getting that economy going as well once the restrictions have lifted. So having those three pieces of the puzzle come together is the challenge, but also the opportunity. And so what we've also done, we've put guidelines out for this fund, and the guidelines include a summary of the sort of priorities that we've got. Obviously, proponents are welcome to submit applications for any of these experiences or public lands, but we've tried to focus some attention on where we think the best bang for buck can be achieved, and the sorts of projects that we think would be very successful at getting funded. And again, the list there is really around the projects that the government's investing in. That's a government-led investment. These are sort of regions and parks where we're spending a lot of our taxpayers' money, and therefore great opportunity for local council or local businesses or private proponents to come and leverage off that government investment and just add value. And we've also got a nature-based tourism strategy that talks about some of South Australia's points of advantage. And that's particularly our wildlife and our walking scenery, our wildlife, our culture, and our heritage. So those four pillars are really what we see South Australia's competitive advantage when we look around Australia. We're all states and territories, we're quite competitive, but we also work together quite closely because Australia is a hard place to get to, particularly for international visitors. It's a long-haul destination. That ultimately will become a great driver after this pandemic lifts. People will see Australia in a whole new light. They'll see Australia as the safe place to go post-COVID, because it's a long way away, it's very spacious, we don't have a lot of people, and yet we have these world-class nature, wildlife, culture experiences. So people, I think, will shift from seeing Australia as an expensive bucket list destination to a high-value, get out there in the next 3 to 5 years experience. So we think it's a really positive time to be investing in nature-based tourism, potentially for a resurgence or a significant uplift in visitation over the next 3 to 5 years. Next slide, thanks. So the way the process works is, we receive an application, all of the criteria are in the guidelines. These are the assessment criteria we've specifically identified, and they carry 20% weighting each, so it's an even weighting across the 5 criteria. Most of these would probably be fairly standard across government grant schemes. we've got our strategic focus, we've got our environmental, social and economic benefit. The one feature of this grant fund that's a little bit different to others is what we call our conservation dividends. So we are asking proponents not only to enter into a lease or license with us to get grant money, but actually to contribute something additional to conservation. And so each proponent will be asked to identify something specific that they're prepared to contribute over and above what they're required to do as part of the fund. So this is very much about giving back to conservation. So people who want to get into tourism in South Australia, we're going to be activating public lands that we're also going to be contributing to the economy and jobs, but also conservation. So our minister's very passionate about this one. He sees it as the point of difference for this fund, that there will be a visible conservation dividend flowing from each approved enterprise. And then of the last two really are about the capability and capacity of the proponent to deliver the project. So we're looking for sustainable long-term business partners, not fly-by-night Johnny-come-latelys. We're looking for really quality applicants to partner with us. And obviously public value for money will be critical. We're spending up to $5 million of public money. The public will want to know that money's been well spent. And so, yeah, we've designed on the right there the approvals pathway, or the snake. We've designed a process, an end-to-end process. So it's not just about providing funding. It's actually about working with potential applicants from the concept, from the ideation phase, all the way through helping them submit an application, keeping them informed as that application gets assessed and hopefully approved, and then holding their hand through the formal approvals process if there's sort of development requirements, all the way through to getting the project delivered, and then accounting for and reporting on the project outcomes and making sure the funding is provided. So it's an end-to-end support system we're providing because we really want it to be seen as a partnership. It's not just about handing out money, it's a partnership. At the end of the day, we want projects to be around long term, and we want applicants to be assisted through the process. There's no shortcuts with this process. It is what it is. The process is quite complicated and multifaceted, which is why we want to work with you through the whole process to make sure we get a really good outcome. And we've also partnered with the Tourism Industry Council. So the Tourism Industry Council is running a series of webinars and support services that are proving quite popular. And that's all about making sure that we get the best possible applications and the best possible project outcomes. And so there's a few of those listed on the left there that, if councils are thinking about putting in applications, the Tourism Industry Council is happy to work on from the ideas stage to the business case to the grant application, even testing the concept and reviewing the application. So they're running a suite of services to make sure that we get the best outcomes possible. And obviously our team back in the department, we're there to answer day-to-day questions. We've got FAQs on the website, and we're more than happy to try to work with potential proponents in that pre-lodgement phase and then during the whole process. And obviously we're responding to proponents. So as we get inquiries, people are asking for extra information. We do whatever we can to provide that extra information. And a lot of the information we have provided, we call our snapshots. This is really about how popular are our national parks. We've got online booking data. We have parks visitation, telephone survey data. We have a whole range of information that we've collected over the years. And we've basically packaged that up and put it onto the website. Plus, if people are interested in some of our heritage buildings, we've got heritage reports. We've got a lot of asset reports for infrastructure and things that we have in parks. So there's a lot of information available from the department that's not always on public display. Plus, we're a community-facing department. We've got over 900 staff in the regions. We're very connected with community. We have a lot of volunteers. So we're very happy to work with proponents in making sure that the local stakeholders are engaged from the outset. and really making sure that as we start talking about developing tourism enterprises in regions particularly, that those local stakeholders are involved in co-designing to some degree those experiences. So that's a bit of a snapshot of the fund. Again, more than happy to answer questions. We are here to help. And I don't know whether you wanted to take questions now or entirely up to you how you'd like to run that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think we will open up for questions. If anyone's got a question that they'd like to ask now. If not, I've got a couple. One is that, as we were chatting about before the webinar, many councils at the moment have got their resources, their human resources stretched, particularly around project management and their ability to apply for grants and think ahead for the future investments that aren't already part of government stimulus programs. The other part of the equation is, of course, that there is opportunity here for private sector investment within government-owned land. And I was wondering, the fund's been open a little while now, and I was wondering whether the Department of Environment and Water has already received some private sector interests in, for developing on government-owned land, and how that referral process might work with councils that actually have responsibility for that land in some way, or would have some authority over planning processes or the like. I was wondering if you've got any comment on that, Chris, at this stage.
Yeah. So there's a couple of parts to that question. Yes, we've had a lot of interest in the fund. We've had over 120 inquiries spread across various pieces of park and land, largely parks, but some Crown land. And so, yeah, we know there are applications in the pipeline. People are beavering away behind the scenes, putting together their applications. Now, part of the guidelines talk very much about engaging early with local stakeholders and landowners. So our expectation would be that if a proponent was proposing to develop something on a piece of Crown land that was care and control of council, for example, that they would have had an early conversation with the council about that well before they put their application in. And obviously, as part of our support service, if we're talking to proponents, that's the advice we would be giving them is engage your local councils, your local stakeholders early, because they will become important decision makers through the process. The last thing we want to do is to end up with a surprise landing on a council's desk late in the process where they've had no visibility of this through the pre-development process. So yes, we encourage proponents to engage early. Obviously, if council is a landholder or a responsible agency, they would be part of the due diligence process. So we would refer information applications to councils early in the piece to get advice on the suitability or otherwise of an application. And then ultimately down the track, as part of the development assessment process, councils will be intimately involved in that, recognising obviously we're moving to a new planning system, and so there's some transition there that we're still working through the specifics of how that's actually going to play out on the ground, because we're at different stages of implementation. But largely, we would expect councils to be very closely involved in these developments.
Thanks, Chris. We've got another question that's come up through the chat, and it's about the details around when funding will be released. So will there be sort of stages of release of some money? Will it be on a case-by-case basis? And when can we expect some money to start flowing out of the fund?
Yeah, so the way we've got it is a reimbursement model. That's probably the simplest way to talk about it. As the money is spent and the receipts are produced, we reimburse the money. Now that can happen if it's a project where the expense, the approval for the expenditure is over a short time frame. So if it's developing a new brochure or manual for a guided walk, for example, you might expect it could be printed and produced in 3 months. Therefore, the money will flow in 3 months. If it's a larger investment, if it's an eco pod type development that's going to take 18 months to construct, well, the money will flow over those 18 months. So it will be tailored to the specific project. And what we've done is we've partnered with the SA Financing Authority, and they basically will be negotiating the milestone payments and releasing the money on receipt of milestone reports. So it's typical of government funding. The proponent will have to spend the money and then claim it back as part of the grant.
Thanks, Chris. I've got one last question, and it relates to support through the application process. And you showed the sort of snake progression of supports that are available to applicants in the diagram. I noticed TICSA was mentioned, and there's lots of resources that you have. I was wondering about the State Commission Assessment Panel would no doubt have or be the relevant planning authority for applications on Crown land and the like, state government-owned land. Would there be design support along the journey to ensure that an application doesn't come unstuck, at sort of one of the final planning assessment phases?
Yeah, exactly. So that's basically what we call case management. So we've got a team in our department that do the planning and assessment type function, and they basically subject matter experts helping us understand the pathways for approvals through the development system. And they also connect up with the native veg branch and the coastal protection branch. And so all of those, we call them sort of pathways. So we can work with the proponents to map out the pathways that they're going to need to take to get an approval down the track. And we hold their hand all the way through that process. We can't shortcut that process, but what we can do is to make sure the proponent goes into it with their eyes open, but they understand this is either going to be a fairly straightforward development assessment process, or it's going to be a highly complex process with multifaceted elements or layers. And we can help them line that up and make sure that they've got the clearest, smoothest pathway possible, including, where there's going to be some challenges. And, if we're honest, some of the developments that we've seen over the recent years have been quite challenging, particularly where we're talking about native vegetation. If we are talking about the removal of native vegetation, or we're talking about sensitive areas where there's a lot of local sensitivity to tourism, those proposals need to be handled quite carefully. So again, it's about case by case. Each application is dealt with case by case on merit, and we put together a support team and a process to help the proponent through those processes. There's no guarantee. The other point is there's no guarantee. There's no such thing as pre-approval. You have to actually go through the process to get an approval. And ultimately, I would hate to think that we would support a funding application if we didn't think the proposal was approvable in the long term. So part of our due diligence really at the front end is to look at all aspects of the proposal and say, is this likely to be approved down the track? Is it a good idea? Does it stack up on those 5 different elements? If so, let's help the proponent through the process.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you for your sort of fulsome and quality, detailed answers to those questions. We'll move along to Tony Halls, who will talk about the recent changes that have been made to leasing and the disposal of Crown land and how that will affect applications on the fund. Thanks, Tony.
No worries, thanks. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everyone. So I'm currently acting manager for Crown Land Operations and normally a senior property officer for the Adelaide Curio Peninsula region. I hope that you can all hear me okay and that this holds out. As Tom mentioned, I'll talk about sort of some recent legislative changes. My talk is going to be a lot more technical, I think, but I will also take this opportunity to, I guess, talk to councils about dedicated Crown land and other options for Crown land beyond maybe just the co-investment fund, because I think it's a good opportunity to engage in this forum and answer those sorts of questions. So on the next slide, we've got dedicated Crown land, and that really is the focus here of I guess this fund and what we're doing with councils in terms of development on dedicated land. So one of the questions and one of the questions I think that we are going to get a lot through this is that development suitable given a dedicated purpose? And so that comes to the question of how do we interpret dedicated purposes? And councils, I'm sure, are well aware of the range of dedicated purposes we have, but certainly common ones include things like recreation, community, sporting clubs, all those sorts of things. What I would say is that typically we take quite a broad approach and a broad view on a dedicated purpose. It was confirmed in the Tennyson Coast Path case a couple of years ago that dedicated purposes can be looked at on a macro level. So, in that instance, it was coast protection as a purpose, and that didn't mean that every square inch of that piece of land had to be protected, but that whole piece of land, that whole parcel or that whole section of land contributed to coast protection. So some development in some areas was appropriate, provided the land could still meet that purpose. We also get asked quite a bit if we have any kind of guide or list or information about definitions for dedicated purposes, so things like recreation, what is allowed, what isn't allowed. Ultimately, we don't have sort of strict guides or anything like that that says this is okay and this isn't okay. As I said, we take it broadly, we take it on a case-by-case basis, and we're more than happy to work with councils or any other custodian for that matter on any sort of proposals and any sort of developments, and to provide advice on whether we would consider that ultimately any development is consistent or not with that purpose. In terms of, I guess, development proposals, that is one of the sort of the three things we look at. Sorry, yes, we're back on. Consistency with dedicated purposes is one of them. Just jump back, Tom. The other things that we look at in terms of development or proposed development of Crown land are in the Act, and that is, would that development detract from any sort of existing public use of the land, and would it otherwise be improper or undesirable? And that's sort of the assessments that we'll use. So how to change a dedicated purpose, which I think is something that may come up here if there was a proposal for some kind of tourism initiative or some kind of development on land that maybe wasn't consistent with the purpose. We have application forms on our website. We have information on our website. It's not an overly onerous process to change a dedicated purpose. So if we wanted to change it from community purposes to tourism purposes, that's something that could generally be done relatively simply. It's delegated to staff within our program. What we do is we do an assessment on how that proposal would meet the objects and principles of the Crown Land Management Act. So I'd encourage all councils to be familiar with those. But broadly, we're looking at the triple bottom line. What are the social, economic, environmental benefits or implications of that proposal? I said it's something that we do quite a bit. Councils can come to us, describe what the proposal is, why they think they would like to change that dedicated purpose, what the benefits are, and we'll, I guess, go through that assessment process. What we do normally do is use it as an opportunity to modernise the dedication. So historically, dedications just had the land is reserved or dedicated for community purposes, full stop. Now we tend to put conditions of dedication on that land, which just sort of sets out a little bit more about, council's legislative or any custodian's legislative obligations under the Crown Land Management Act. Gives us a little bit of power to stop work if we think that there is sort of some damage or risk to the environment. I've got in here about leasing of dedicated land. So section 22 of the Crown Land Management Act was changed a few years ago to make it easier for councils to lease dedicated land to third parties. What effectively that says is that if the proposed lease is consistent with the dedicated purpose, if it isn't proposing new development, and if it's unlikely to have effect on native title, that councils can issue those leases without our minister's consent. Historically, all leases on Crown land did need our minister to consent. If unfortunately the lease does meet one of those things and it is proposing development or it is inconsistent with the purpose, then there is a process, again, an application form on our website to go through the process and to seek consent from our minister for a lease. I think as part of this fund, there may be, that may be something that happens a bit with operators looking to develop on land under council's care and control. And finally, about dedicated Crown land. So the purchase of dedicated Crown land, which I think is not specifically maybe part of the co-investment fund in the short term, because that fund is really about land under council's care and control and not their private land. But certainly, as part of our ongoing relationship with councils and our encouragement of particularly development in regional areas, there were changes last year to Premier Cabinet Circular 114 that I'm hoping councils are relatively aware of. So historically, councils couldn't really purchase Crown land if it was for residential, sort of commercial or industrial uses. Cabinet 114 required that those councils didn't have favourable conditions over the private market. What the changes have said recently is that if councils are custodians of dedicated Crown land in particular and are seeking to purchase land and at a regional council, then they can do so without the need for an open process. So it is a bit easier for councils to deal with land and to actually take ownership of land. That might give them a bit more flexibility to manage that land without having to come to us to get consents, without having to worry about being consistent with a dedicated purpose and relying on the Local Government Act to manage that land for the best of the community. So that's something I think that councils can think about and hopefully we've made a little bit easier. Next slide, thanks Tom. So aside from dedicated Crown land, I thought I'd also touch on what we call unalienated Crown land. So that's typically vacant land that has no tenure, and it might be an opportunity for councils or for other providers in partnership with council to look at actually taking land under their control. So there are a range of tenure options. Dedication is probably a common one, certainly one that we encourage with councils. There's no ongoing fees to us for dedicated land. It's just the fees up front for us to process that application. It puts it in council community land register. It's a good option to recognise the use of that land, typically for sort of a public purpose. Purchase of unalienated Crown land is nearly always done on the open market at market value. So that's less of an option, I think, on unalienated Crown land, but there are special circumstance provisions in our Act. So our Minister does have some power to deal direct with people if there are special circumstances which warrant that. And then we also have leasing and licensing options available. Councils do certainly hold licenses in a number of locations around the placing leases as well. Often when councils might only want an interest in a portion of a parcel of land rather than the whole thing, a license is a good option to recognise. Maybe it's just a toilet block or an access road or something like that. So rather than council taking management of that whole piece of land, it might just be a small area that actually council needs to have control of and to have oversight of. Again, if you go to our website, there's application forms for all the different tenures and information on what tenures are appropriate for what. And just the last sort of tenure I'll touch on briefly on the next slide. Trust grants. So a trust grant is freehold land, so it's not Crown land under council's control, but it is freehold land that is still subject to some kind of condition or encumbrance. Historically, trust grants were reserved and set aside for a specific purpose, maybe hospitals, maybe schools, parkland, maybe there's sort of a variety it can be. Under the new Crown Land Management Act, newish, they became a Crown condition agreement where the only condition is that the land must be used for whatever purpose a former trust had. New development on land subject to a Crown condition agreement must be consistent with that purpose. And there are ways though that councils can look at varying or removing that. So again, if that purpose isn't suitable, there are ways to vary that. It's a bit more complicated than a dedication, being a trust grant or being a Crown condition agreement, but it is doable. Or councils may actually seek to remove that trust and have it as an unencumbered freehold title, or return it to the state because it no longer needs it for that purpose. So there are options there. There's not that many of them around, but there are a few. So if you do come across one, I just encourage you to have a chat to your local office or through our general inquiries line. Which leads me to the next slide, which is really just where to go for more information. We have the website there, environment.sa, through to the Crown Land section. We have sort of updated that pretty recently to talk a bit about the retaining shack selection commitment and also to have a bit hopefully clearer information about Crown land, and certainly to update our forms and information sheets and things like that. We also have a generic email, so that comes into sort of our team here in Adelaide and then is responded to appropriately. If it's a specific sort of inquiry, we'll report to the relevant region who knows a little bit more about that area. But if it's just a sort of general inquiry, then it might come through to me or one of our team here to respond. So I also expect councils probably know who their contacts are in their area, and I'd encourage you to have a chat to them. As I said, we are very keen to encourage regional development in particular. We are keen to see Crown land used in the best interest of the state and the local community. So we are very keen to facilitate these kinds of activities, provided they meet the objects of our Act. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Tony. Is there any questions from those that are logged in at the moment? I've just got one, Tony. You mentioned the Premier and Cabinet Circular 114, and you mentioned in there that one of the objectives of that was to ensure that councils don't have favourable treatment over the private sector. I'm guessing in the leasing or purchase of Crown land. I'm just interested in how that intersects now with this fund, where obviously where ecologically sustainable and socially beneficial investment from the private sector is encouraged, how those two things sort of interact. Was that circular particularly interested in councils not having favourable treatment in the purchase of land, i.e., monopoly application or a cheaper price or those sorts of things? But if councils purchase land and then allow a private sector, a tourism investor, to come up with a really good ecologically sustainable project, that's what the department and the government would like? Am I kind of on the right track with that line of thinking?
Yeah, I think so. I think, historically the clause that had been in there was, as you said, it was, it was about, councils not having, I think, sort of first right to land maybe, and to try and offset the private sector. We certainly made it easier, and we were very keen to push it for remote and regional councils in particular, where maybe the market doesn't always allow or have that interest in that land. So we I guess recognise that particularly in regional areas, councils maybe actually have more of a role to play in encouraging and facilitating commercial opportunities, industrial opportunities, residential opportunities. So I think that this is an opportunity for, it's in the short term, the focus is on dedicated land, but longer term, it really has been to allow councils to have a greater role in encouraging economic development of all kinds within their areas.
Are there any other questions from the floor? If not, is there anything that any of the presenters or Linda would like to mention before we close the webinar today? Apart from to maybe encourage all councils to think long and hard about good investments and those relationships they have with their tourism operators while the fund's still open?
Yeah, I mean, that maybe just to reinforce that message that obviously we're incredibly busy at the moment trying to defend ourselves from COVID-19, and obviously the latest little cluster in the last couple of days has put a bit of a scare through the community. But we've got a 2-year fund deliberately. We've made the fund a very open fund, really to recognise that people will be at different stages of preparedness to think about applying for funding. So we didn't want everyone just to rush, over the next month or two to put applications in. We've got 2 years to get applications. So just reinforce that to councils that you don't have to, rush to get an application in the next few weeks. It's think about it when you've got a bit of breathing space, maybe over Christmas, New Year, in the new year, if things start to settle down a bit, you come and talk to us about any ideas, talk to your local business operators. We're very keen to activate this funding and our spaces. And if it does take 6 to 12 months to come up with an application, that's fine. There's no rush here. The opportunity is there, but we've left it open for 2 years deliberately to give people time to put their ideas together. So, yeah, just a really important point, I think, given everything that's happening at the moment, that we're not forcing people into a tight time frame. We're deliberately giving them space to think and move at the speed that works for them.
Yeah, brilliant message, Chris, and a good message to finish off on. On behalf of all the councils that are tuned in and those that will watch this in the future, thank you, Chris, Tony and Linda, for your time and expertise today. For those council staff listening, we'll have this recording available, all going well, on Monday in the latest news feed that you receive via email. With that, I'll call this session to a close, and thank you all for attending.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, all.
Thank you for that. Cheers.
Oh.